everything in the Constitution was arrived at by compromise. The interests and concerns of the 13 states varied widely, and each delegate was sent to Philadelphia to protect the commerce, industry, and agriculture of his particular state. It required months of patient discussion, argument, and forbearance to finally produce the finished document, which, when completed, comprised a system of government to protect the people in the rights and liberties set down in flaming words in the Declaration of Independence. It is a wonderful document, the best system of government ever devised for human beings, but it could only have varied in some respects and still have worked satisfactory. The supreme achievement of the combined brains of all those men were written into those 2 sentences, and the freedom and liberty of the American people were secured in them. For in those 2 sentences, the right of the free man to own something was made inviolate. This was his distinguishing mark, the only criterion of freedom in all the world, the right of the common man to retain for himself the fruit of his labor. Now this is how it worked. Every man was given a vote with which he could vote for his representative. Originally, only representatives were elected, senators were appointed by the state legislatures, and it's too bad we changed that provision. And just a little editor's note here. We did not. Like the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment is a fraud. It was never ratified by the states. Going back to Vivian Kellum's text. That representative, having to stand for election every 2 years, was close to the people and responsive to their wishes. That is why he was given the power to tax. All bills of revenue arise in the House. And that is why he must come home every 2 years and give an accounting to the people. But his power to levy direct taxes was limited by an iron-bound restriction. That tax must be apportioned among the states in accordance with the population. Since all taxes were to be a uniform rate, Congress simply could not penalize one section of the country or one group of citizens for the unfair advantage of another. When Congress levied a tax, everybody had to pay, and at the same rate. The amount would vary with the wealth of an area, as it does today with the different values of real estate, but the rate was the same for all, and the tax was distributed among the states according to the population. The men who wrote our Constitution did not found a democracy. They feared the so-called Democrats of their day as much as we fear the communists today. They did not believe in mob rule or government by the unintelligent, irresponsible mass. They founded a constitutional republic, and they made certain that the right to vote should be curbed and controlled by the necessity of paying taxes. Scheming politicians could not take taxes from a helpless minority and buy themselves back into office with the votes of the tax-exempt majority. When a representative voted a tax, he voted to tax everybody because the tax was based on numbers, not upon dollars. This was the most brilliant plan ever conceived for guaranteeing the freedom of a nation. It protected every person in his right to private property, rich and poor alike, and under this protection we built the richest, most powerful nation on earth. We achieved and maintained for the majority of our people a standard of living undreamed of before, the hope and the envy of the free world. And we accomplished something even more important. We developed a vigorous, self-reliant, self-respecting race of people. An American citizen would have been ashamed to ask for a handout from his government. The government belonged to him. He did not belong to the government. And then what happened? We chucked our carefully safeguarded right to own something right out the window, and we passed the Income Tax Amendment. Gone was our apportionment among the states in accordance with population, and also gone was our principle of uniformity. Income from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration, could be taxed and without limit. And when we passed this Income Tax Amendment, which of course I mentioned it was never passed, the slow distilled poison of tax slavery dripped into our veins. We sowed the seeds of our national decay, which is rapidly coming to maturity before our eyes today. The heritage of freedom so carefully ensured for us by our forefathers is gone. It has been taxed away. And as I mentioned, this was from Vivian Kellum's book she wrote in 1952. She wrote this book after she sued the federal government on the withholding issue. I took a trip from Sacramento, California, all the way to the National Archives in Boston to retain all of her trial files, and they are available on my CD. Vivian Kellums was truly a remarkable woman for her time. Now I want to go into the General Welfare Clause of the Constitution. The majority of unconstitutional spending is justified by the, quote, General Welfare Clause of the Constitution. Sean O'Connor of the Free Enterprise Society summed up this misconception in one of his speeches paraphrased below. Quote, discussion of the General Welfare Clause of the Constitution by the courts relies upon the Federalist Papers. This term simply means taxation was to protect the individual's life, liberty, and ownership of private property. One can go to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the Constitution and read the General Welfare Clause. Then one can do some history research and see what the Anti-Federalists had to say about this clause. That this clause conveys absolute power to the central government. Patrick Henry was very vocal in his opposition to putting this kind of language into the Constitution. Madison, however, assured Patrick Henry and others that all the General Welfare Clause represented was a preliminary introduction prior to the enumerating the specific powers the delegates were about to grant to this new federal government, and that the General Welfare Clause granted no new power to the government whatsoever. It was simply an introductory statement. The Anti-Federalists still weren't satisfied. Hamilton and Madison came back to restate that if the General Welfare Clause conveyed absolute power to the government, why would they go on to list the specific powers they were going to grant the government? That wouldn't make any sense at all if they were going to give absolute power to this government. It was finally conceded by all at the convention that the General Welfare Clause conveyed absolutely no new power to the government. End of comment. The General Welfare Clause of the Constitution has been misused for personal gain by special interest groups to enrich the pockets of the banking cartel, by politicians hoping to get that vote, and an all-out push to turn America into a socialist country, beginning with the New Deal implemented by FDR and supported by a weak Congress. Lyndon Johnson took the quest to turn America into a socialist nation to new and grotesque heights. How would you fund the federal government without any direct taxation? The powers that be know it's just a matter of time before the truth reaches enough Americans about the voluntary income tax system. Already trial balloons are being floated to once again fool the people into some sort of alternative tax in order to feed the central bank. America functioned very well without an income tax throughout the history of this republic. The answer to the question of funding without a direct tax is found in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution since 1787. It provides for Congress to pass a legislative bill for tax money to be paid by each state in proportion to its population. Proper constitutional funding will allow large amounts of money to fund a limited form of Republican government. To continue on the path of this massive and unconstitutional spending will bring a final and total collapse of the economy. Make no mistake about it, America.